As the US-Israeli war with Iran continues, Britain faces a familiar question. How far should it go in supporting US military action in the Middle East? The country's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, says UK bases could be used if needed, but critics warn it would risk dragging Britain into another war. So what role should Britain be playing, and where should it draw the line with the United States? Well, joining me to discuss this is the former leader of the Labour Party and now a UK Member of Parliament for the recently created Your Party, Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you for joining us on UpFront. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to see you. Thank you.
So Donald Trump has criticized Britain's refusal to join the US-Israel war on Iran. And he said, I quote, "I'm not happy about it." He went as far as criticizing the Prime Minister, saying, "We are not dealing with a Winston Churchill here." Trump wants the UK to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz. What do you make of his demand and the UK's response?
I think that President Trump is being very demanding of Britain and not explaining what the strategy of the US is and not explaining what he wants Britain to do in this. By contrast, the Prime Minister has actually been quite confusing as well, because he at one time appeared to give some support to the US strategy in Iran, then said Britain would not be involved in offensive strikes against Iran, and then a few days later authorized the use of Royal Air Force bases in Britain for American Air Force planes to take off from to bomb Iran, and claiming this is only a defensive action. My view, and that of a lot of people in Britain, is that because of this confusion, Keir Starmer has actually dragged us very close to the American position. By contrast, Spain has done the very opposite and said absolutely no use of any facilities in Spain to bomb Iran. And other European countries have said they're not prepared to join in this. So I do think there is a bit of a difference between most of the European countries and Britain. But this is awful. Thousands of people are being killed. Millions or billions of dollars is being spent on these weapons. And at the end of it, there will be devastation, there will be grief, and there will have to be some kind of settlement. Trump knows that. Everybody knows that. So why not get on with it?
Let's talk a little bit about the Prime Minister's concession that the US can use UK military bases, as you've mentioned. You have warned that Britain can't afford to be dragged into another illegal war. And you've actually proposed a law that would require parliamentary approval for the use of UK military bases. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, I presented a bill to Parliament 10 days ago, which would require the British government, any British government, to go to Parliament first before the deployment of any forces or the use of British facilities for somebody else's forces to launch an attack. In other words, before the Prime Minister could have authorised the use of the Royal Air Force bases in Britain by the Americans, he would have had to come and seek parliamentary approval. That they've declined to do, and so far there has been no parliamentary approval given at all. So we're pursuing that particular demand.
Does this not jeopardize a historic relationship, a military relationship with the United States? I mean, Trump says the US would remember who helped and who didn't. It does sound like there'll be consequences. It sounds like a threat. Can you afford, as the UK, to defy the US president?
I think any country has got to decide what it wants to do and what it thinks is the best way forward to achieve a solution to this conflict. And if that means disagreeing with Donald Trump, then disagree with Donald Trump and do so. The idea that Britain, or indeed any other country in the world, can simply say to Donald Trump, you can do what you like, you can use our bases, you can use our facilities and conduct a war. Wars have consequences. They have consequences on future relations. They have consequences on the way people are going to treat Britain in the immediate future. And so I do think that it is important that instead of deepening and intensifying the bombing of Iran, we actually look for a way forward. Britain could have been that voice to look for a way forward, but since we've now got so involved with Donald Trump's plans, I don't think we have any credibility to do that.
Let's talk a little bit about NATO. You've been a critic of NATO, a vociferous critic for many years. And in 2022, you actually said, you declared that you want to see, quote, a world where we start to ultimately disband all military alliances. On Monday, Trump says NATO faces a very bad future, quote, if they don't help. Where do you think this leaves the alliance?
I think the NATO alliance is in a very difficult situation, and it's been a difficult situation quite a long time. It originally, as we all know, started out as a specifically Atlanticist agreement between some Western European countries and the United States and Canada. Then in the early 2000s, the NATO expansion and the spheres of influence agreement, and indeed the involvement of NATO in the Afghan war, made it into a global alliance. And I think as a global military alliances are not a good thing. What surely you want is adherence to international law and norms that have gone on. But interestingly, over the last 3 or 4 days, the NATO General Secretary and a number of European prime ministers have all said they do not think that NATO should be involved in the war in Iran. And that's where Trump comes back and says, well, that's putting NATO in a very difficult situation. It's quite clear there is a growing divergence between the United States and its views on NATO and European leaders as well. So I think we're going to see a diminution in the role of NATO going forward.
Let's stay with the international order. I want to reference a post or a comment that you posted on X, where you say, when the powerful speak of a rules-based international order, they mean rules for others and impunity for themselves. In your view, what does a fair international system, rules-based international system, look like?
Well, a fair rules-based international system would be one where you adhere to the conventions on human rights, on refugee rights, and you would also adhere to international agreements on nuclear non-proliferation treaty, for example, which is coming up for review next month. And you would take your conflicts to the United Nations and ask them to intervene and try and bring about a resolution. Iran and the US could have both gone to the United Nations. Instead, what happened was we have the bombing of Iran and then Iran protests at the UN. That's a pattern all over the world. The problem fundamentally is that the United States has always been skeptical about the role of the United Nations. Donald Trump in particular is very hostile to the United Nations and essentially doesn't see it as anything very important. And reading his national security strategy of last November, he sees the way forward as essentially American military power all over the world will decide what the supply of raw materials and minerals are to the USA. We're in a period when the US seems to think that it is ruling the entire world. Well, the rest of the world doesn't see it that way.
You've said that the only real winners in this war are arms manufacturers. In the past, you've also noted, I quote, the government's thoughts are reserved for those who profit from destruction. How, in your view, does this translate into influence over war policy and the duration of these wars?
Arms manufacturers' shares have gone up massively in the past 3 years, and their profits have gone up massively as well. The arms fairs around the world show the effects of drones in Ukraine, in Russia, in Gaza, on the West Bank, in Iran, in Lebanon, and so on. And these are then sold as super weapons. So we then end up with often AI-generated targets with weapons sent automatically to bomb and kill and destroy people and places as a result. So we have this sort of 21st century warfare being conducted often against countries which don't have anything of the equivalence of that, and indeed people that are largely defenseless against them. And I just find it horrific the way that warfare has developed into this super tech annihilation of other places and other people's societies. Surely we in the 21st century can do a bit better than that. The outcome of the Iran conflict or the Lebanon conflict is going to be what? Bombardment, destruction, and a deep set of anger. all those people that have lost their family, lost their friends, and lost their communities are going to be angry for a very long time to come at the way Israel and the United States have bombed their country. It doesn't mean they agree with everything to do with the government of Iran, but history shows us when a country is under attack, there tends to be a unifying factor around whoever is in authority at that time, because they're the ones that ultimately offer limited perhaps, but some form of protection. Can't we end this war? Can't we look at the issue of resources, look at the issue of people's rights and human rights? And they're not going to be improved by bombing.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you for joining us on UpFront.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's our show. UpFront will be back next week. Goodbye.